You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
David, are you vertical for this?
Am I vertical, as in laying down to record this?
Well, that would be horizontal.
Right. So so then, yes, I'm vertical, although as I get older, my spine isn't entirely straight, so I'm semi-vertical.
Because I think I've said before, like sometimes when you're interviewing me, it's like therapy. I'm going to interview you. This is part 2 of our discussion on your book, The Business of Expertise, How Entrepreneurial Experts Convert Insight to Impact and Wealth. The book's been in the market for a couple months now, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. About 2 months.
Yeah. And you happy with how things are going so far?
I am a little disappointed that it's the second best-selling book of all time on the New York Times list. I was really looking for the first place, but, I've got a few weeks to fix that. So
Yeah, all right. I asked you about whether you're vertical, this idea of vertical and horizontal, because today I want to delve into a part of the book that really gets into the nuts and bolts of positioning. And if you're following along at home and you have the book at home, I really want to dive into chapters 8 and 9. And chapter 8 is distinguishing between vertical and horizontal expertise. And then 9 kind of builds on that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You're going to have to explain the title of chapter 9 to all of us.
Okay. But, first, can I tell you something really cool that happened last week? During Hurricane Irma, I got this email message from this guy that said, all the power's out, and I'm trying to read your book, but it's too dark. Could you send it to me in PDF form? Or if you are worried that I might distribute it without your permission, could you just email it to my Kindle, and I want to read it during the days the power's out. I thought, has anybody ever asked you to read about reading your book when the power's out during a hurricane? It just expresses how important
I want to know if you charged him $38 for the PDF.
No, I sent it to him. I want the record to show that this is prime reading material during hurricanes.
Yeah, that might come in handy. I don't think season's quite over yet. There might be more coming.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's always
stock up
next year.
Water and copies of the book.
Yeah. Okay, so hurricane reading, we got that dealt with. When I was reading this part of the book, and I've been through the book many times, but it occurs to me, I always assume that you and I are on the same page on everything, especially when it comes to positioning. I mean, we've done I think it was a 3-day seminar.
Yeah,
Maybe
3
it was
days.
2 days. 3-day seminar together for 10 years straight, and we did an entire day on positioning. The first day was always on positioning, so I think we were always pretty aligned. But I'm reading this and thinking, there might be some subtle areas where we're not fully aligned, and by that I mean some areas where you're wrong. So let's explore that.
You beat me to that. I was just getting ready to say that.
That's why I had to hurry up to say it. I don't think we are, but there are some different, I really noted some of the different ways that we might express some things. So first of all, this idea of positioning your expertise horizontally or vertically, what do you mean by that?
So classically, a vertical positioning would follow a particular SIC, which stands for Standard Industrial Classification, SIC category. SIC categories kind of went out in the late 90s, and now those are NAICS, that stands for something else, and there's a lot more specific. So essentially, it's like if you're focusing on a vertical, then you're focusing on credit unions or gas stations or healthcare firms or financial planners or something like that. So it follows an industry classification. And the horizontal component of that would be if your focus is across all of those verticals, but is identified in multiple ways. So vertical is identified by one way, and that's by industry. Horizontal could be defined in multiple ways, so like a demographic. So I'm a firm, I just worked with a firm recently, a 75-person firm that focuses on the youth market. So they're going to help clients in many different verticals reach the youth market. That's a classic horizontal positioning. Or it could be selling a particular service. So you might be doing point of purchase work or shopper marketing, and you would be doing that particular service across all of the verticals. So that's how I would define the two.
Okay, so vertical is really the market. Is that right? And horizontal is the discipline?
Is the discipline or the demographic, right? Those two.
Or so the demographic, so it could be another form of a market.
Right. Like Hispanic marketing is a classic horizontal marketing. And if you're a horizontal marketing agency focused on the Hispanic marketplace, then you might be working with Maytag or GE, or you might be working with a bank or a medical practice. And so you're touching lots of different verticals, but all reaching the same demographic, the Hispanic market. And that would be a classic horizontal positioning.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's a way of kind of segmenting or identifying the market. It's either a vertical market or horizontal market.
Right.
Is that more correct?
Right, and it's handy to do because how you think about positioning happens to align very differently. If you're a vertically positioned firm, there are very specific advantages. If you're horizontally aligned, very specific advantages, and they're all very different too.
Okay. Can you, before we get into the advantages of either, is it possible to be both vertically and horizontally positioned?
It is. When that's true of your firm, you're going to have a very, very small target audience of potential clients. And so the advantage of that is it's like a bullseye, right? With a horizontal and a vertical. So you are going to kill it there. There's nobody
in the
that can touch you,
so to speak.
Yeah, exactly, in the crosshairs. But that's also the disadvantage because some firms will have a vertical positioning and they feel like if I narrow it too much more, then I'm not sure there's going to be enough opportunity. But if there's enough opportunity with both a vertical and a horizontal, like in that bullseye thing, then it's very, very powerful. It's untouchable.
Okay. So let's talk about the advantages first of positioning the firm along vertical expertise. The first one is that you say in the book is it's easier to find prospects when you're vertically positioned. Why is that?
It's because most of the business world is oriented around vertical positioning. So, for instance, if you're going to buy a list, and it doesn't matter if you actually buy a list, but can you buy a list? And if you can't buy a list, then you're going to have trouble finding your prospects in many different ways. And so, almost all the list building is built around verticals, and so that's the primary advantage. And, most firms are drawn more to horizontal positioning for different reasons, but they default to vertical positioning because they can't find their clients with horizontal positioning. So vertical positioning fixes that, and it's the default because of one thing. It's so easy to find your clients.
Yeah, you have this clarity. I find that you go through this decision-making process and often a lot of pain around deciding on the market to focus on. And then once you make a decision, after a little while, there's some fear, and then there's some euphoria. And the euphoria is you finally know the answer to the question, who do you call and what do you say?
Right.
Yeah. How do you find prospects, and then what do you say to those prospects? So that becomes... the euphoria comes from the realization that, oh my God, there are lists of these people who need services like this that I could go out and buy.
Yeah, and why are there lists of these people? It's because they suffer from something that other people have realized and decided they need to gather all these people on a list or at the same conference or reading the same journal or same blog because they suffer from the same things. And those are the things that I can help them fix. Like it just solves so many things. Yeah.
Your second benefit of a vertical positioning, something I'd never really thought of before, and that's that benefits that vertical positioning benefits from decision makers who change jobs frequently.
Yeah, and there was a really interesting study that came out. It was fueled by a lot of data from LinkedIn, and what the study surfaced is that folks in the marketplace used to stay at the same job for a long time, and that's how they made more money. They got raises and so on. And that's changed on its face. It's just so different now. You don't make enough money by staying longer at the same job. You jump up fairly incrementally by just staying, but you jump and you take huge steps in your compensation by changing jobs. And so people are changing jobs more frequently than they ever have in history. When they do, what kind of a firm do they go to? typically nowadays, there are exceptions, but typically they go to another firm in the same vertical. So if your positioning is tied to a vertical, the chances are much better that you're going to follow your contact, your decision maker, to their new job. And you may retain the current client and also pick up the new client because you're following this decision maker, and they almost always change jobs within the same vertical.
I'm sure you've seen this pattern where you have clients who their primary business development strategy is just they have one client who just moves every 2 years and brings them with them.
Yeah, exactly.
And then what's the ultimate mistake that firm makes?
Just not doing their own new business much, or pissing off that one client, right?
Or they hire that client and bring them in-house and all the all
killing
the
their new business
leads.
plan. Yeah, right.
Yeah. The third primary benefit for positioning the firm's expertise vertically is you benefit from common venues that spread the word about your firm. So you're talking about conferences primarily, are you?
Conferences, for sure. That would be the primary one, but also publications, associations, newsletters, blogs. I think of it as like the water cooler effect. Most water coolers, if they had a sign hanging over them, would be a vertically oriented sign. That's not always true. Like, you will find a conference out there for companies who want to be mission driven, for instance, or who want a certain culture. But most of the industry, or even like a Salesforce, would be a horizontal conference. Those are rare. Most of the conferences, most of the water coolers out there are vertical, and so that's a benefit in terms of just spreading the word. Because no matter how good your new business plan is, you are still going to get a lot of organic traffic. I don't mean just web traffic, but organic traffic in terms of lead generation because of the word spreading in good ways.
Yeah, so a vertical example of a conference would be pharmaceutical marketing or credit union marketing or anything. I mean, pick a million of them.
Right.
The fourth primary benefit of or advantage of a vertical positioning is it's usually more highly compensated. Why would that be?
Yeah, and there are some exceptions, and they're notable, like IR, investor relations would be an example, or crisis work, which are horizontal but are still very highly compensated. Mm-hmm. The reason vertical positioning is more highly compensated is because vertical positioning usually carries an assumption of agency of record, AOR. And agency of record firms are going to make the most money. If the average Fortune 1000 has about 19 agencies kind of sucking at the teat, the one making the most money is the AOR. And vertically oriented firms are usually the AOR relationship driver, and so they get paid the most.
And so the horizontally focused firms tend to be more niche specialists who would come in and do specific work.
Right, exactly. So like I'm in Atlanta right now, for instance, and here the headquarters of Coca-Cola. So whoever is the AOR for Coca-Cola is making boatloads of money. But there's also going to be a Hispanic and a shopper marketing, and there's going to be these horizontal agencies that are also serving Coke, and they're usually smaller, and they're obviously not AOR relationship driven, and they're not making quite as much money. But the one making the most money is the AOR side.
So we could explore that a little bit more. A friend of mine who owns a bunch of agencies, who's buying a bunch of agencies, the way he explains it to me is he says the AOR is more like the general practitioner right now. They control the budgets, but their margins are actually pretty slim. He said the benefit, if you look at the holding companies, the benefit of having your firm in there as the AOR is you can direct the highly specialized, highly profitable spending to other firms under the banner in the same network. So his argument is the dollar volume is there in that relationship. The margin isn't there. The more horizontally focused specialists are, even though the budgets are a lot smaller, their margins are higher. Is that would you agree or disagree with that?
That's generally true, and that's why the holding companies have so many agencies under them, so that they can direct that work to another agency, like your friend just said, like Omnicom, for instance. I think they have 500 agencies, so they're going to have an agency that can be where work from the AOR can be driven to them. So while the margins are smaller for the huge agencies, there's a lot of margins in there. So you multiply a smaller margin by 1,000 times, there's boatloads of money, especially on the media side.
Yeah. Okay. So. If you had to advise a client, if you didn't know what the choices I have choice A and choice B, and you didn't know what the details of the choices were, other than A is vertical and B is horizontal, would you come down on one side or the other and say, I think you'd be better off with vertical over horizontal?
Well, I would usually, if it was me, I would do vertical. But for my clients, I would start with horizontal because I know that 85% of them desperately want a horizontal positioning, and I would just gut check it really quickly. Are we able to find our clients? Let's lead with this horizontal positioning. Can we find our clients? If we can, let's keep going. If we can't, then let's switch over to vertical. So that's how I would think about it, because most folks in the creative industry are so much more drawn to horizontal positioning.
And well, let's talk about that. It's probably advantage number one, which is it brings more variety. Is that what's driving it?
Yeah, the idea of being focused on healthcare, for instance, and they're going to vomit at their desks thinking about using another stock photo of a mother and daughter running hand in hand along the beach, doing one more pharma ad or something. But absolutely, that is the primary advantage. There are other important advantages, but that's the biggest one: variety. They don't want to be pigeonholed in a particular vertical, so they're drawn to horizontal. And to go back to your question just a minute ago, so that's why I would start with horizontal. I'd gut check it and say, can we find our clients? In fact, often I'll flip these things around. So we talked about the four advantages of vertical. We could flip those around and we could say those four things are the disadvantages of horizontal. So it's hard to find your clients. The comp isn't as high. You're not going to move as frequently when somebody changes jobs, and your prospects don't gather around the same water coolers and so on. So the primary one is for sure variety.
Okay, and so I can imagine agency principals they're thinking of themselves. So it'll be the death of me if I specialize, but they're also thinking about their people and attracting high quality creative people, because they think, and I think often quite rightly, that the really best creative people, they don't want to be focused in a niche,
especially earlier in their career. Right, they're still exploring, and the idea of deep competence is not as important to them as variety and trying lots of things. And then, in their mid to late 30s, they usually have a change of heart there. And, the principal is always older than the median age of the folks working there. And so what drives that older principal is often very different from what drives the people working for him or her.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying even a creative person at some point in the middle of her career might decide, I'm tired of kind of flitting across all these different challenges. I'd really like to feel like an expert. I'd really like to build
exactly.
Okay.
They taste competence at some point, and they never want, and they've also tasted incompetence. I remember where that occurred for me. It's like, and I tasted incompetence many times. And so when I tasted competence, the difference was so staggering to me. I just made this pledge to myself. I'm never going to go back there. I'm tired of that. I look stupid.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker of Recourses, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
The second advantage of horizontal is really interesting. It nearly eliminates conflict of interest. And then you've got this kind of, you break it down. You say, if you have one client in a space, a certain market, then you're learning about that space.
Right.
If you have two clients in that market, then it's seen as a conflict of interest. But once you get to 3, you're an expert. And once you get to 4, all conflicts evaporate.
Right. Yeah, and somebody else said something like that. I couldn't find the original statement, so I couldn't really credit them. But it's absolutely true. And so, this is usually an objection that a creative agency has early in their thought process around positioning. They're drawn to horizontal because of the variety. And they think, well, what about this conflict of interest thing? And so it's true that all conflicts of interest are largely eliminated if you're positioned vertically, but I don't think that's a very strong argument, honestly, and that's what your quote really is relating to, because as nervous as clients are about conflicts of interest, they are flat terrified of incompetence, and so they recognize that any agency that's going to help them is going to have worked in their space. Now, larger agencies, they don't call that specialization. They call it category experience. That's just how they phrase it. Mm-hmm. So they're drawn, and that's, when a Fortune 1000 chooses an agency, the first issue is not category experience. It's not specialization. It's something else. But they have to check that category experience box unless, and this is a rare and very new situation. I think the world might be moving more in this direction, unless they just simply, like Capital One, for instance, will tell you, we simply do not want to work with an agency that specializes in financial services. Underneath, in sort of low volume, they'll say, well, they need to have category experience, but they don't want somebody, because it's like, we've learned what we need to learn there. We want somebody that knows UX in another field and so on. So generally, it's kind of a smokescreen. I remember, in my own practice, I've worked with, hundreds of agencies, and every once in a while, once every 3 or 4 years, somebody will ask me about that. Well, who have you worked with in our town? But frankly, they don't care anymore. They would rather, they have to trust me, but they would rather that I have worked with a bunch of firms like theirs so that I can notice those patterns and guide them through it.
Yeah. Okay. Benefit number 3 of horizontal is greater protection from a downturn.
This is a pretty big one.
Is it universal?
It's almost universal, but I would flip this around and ask you this question, and then I'll answer it. Like, how many vertically positioned clients have you had over the decades you've been in this business who have been devastated because their particular vertical niche hit a downturn? Let's say the oil industry in maybe the 70s or whenever that was, or banking at a certain point.
A small number, almost all in real estate marketing. But if they make it through the one downturn, they figure out how to survive the next one.
Yeah.
And you people who kind of dabble in luxury goods too, they can be hit too. But I find real estate marketing, a downturn, everything stops.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. All the people that supposedly believed in marketing on the client side don't believe in it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But other than that, no, it's usually what I'm fond of saying, it's the generalists who get whacked in a downturn, not the specialists. But again, that's not making a distinction between vertical or horizontal. So you're saying a vertically specialized firm is far less likely to feel the negative effects of a downturn.
Yeah.
They can ride it out longer. Why is that?
So a horizontal firm is more likely to be okay because if a particular vertical is hit, that may only represent 5% of their client base. So they have the other 95% of their client base that's not getting hit by some particular downturn.
So you're saying the downturn, so verticals are more susceptible, certain verticals are more susceptible to. So if you're in a more susceptible vertical, you're more likely to be affected.
Right.
But then there's a spectrum of them, and some of them you're less likely to be affected. Are there verticals, sorry to cut you off, but are there verticals that are just like impervious to downturns where spending always happens?
Well, the 3 over the years were always tech, financial services, and healthcare. But all 3 of those have been hit. So I don't think there's any that's like built so high that no flood can hit it. But we are also such a global economy anymore that even a downturn in a particular country doesn't impact us quite the way it did. And so one of the advantages of horizontal is that if there's a downturn in a given vertical, it's less likely to take your firm down because, it represents a pretty small portion of your overall business. That's the point here. But I like you said, I asked you that question and you said only a couple have been hurt badly, and even then not that badly. I would answer the question the same way. I only know one firm that went out of business because of that. The rest of them they just thrive. So it's not a huge issue.
The last primary advantage of a horizontal positioning is you can work for larger, more sophisticated clients. I think we kind of touched on that when talking about vertical.
Right.
Anything more you want to add to that?
No, that's the point. Just like horizontal expertise, there's never an expectation on the client's part part that you are going to be the full service agency of record. And so that allows you to work for much larger, more sophisticated clients with money, because you are going to exist alongside other agencies who are going to be their full service agency.
You mentioned the phrase that you hear from agency principals from time to time, that they don't want to be pigeonholed. I've always loved that line, because my response is, well, what people don't know is the pigeonholes are stuffed with cash.
Yeah.
And so it's a great visual metaphor. But do people see vertical positioning as more of a pigeonhole, like a narrow,
for sure,
like a constrictive, narrow focus than horizontal?
They do, absolutely, they do. But when you get them to think a little bit more about it, usually it opens up their horizons a bit. I usually try to get them to think about all the verticals up and down within that particular niche. All the side industries that also serve that, and how you could do things differently. So, but you're right. That's what slaps people in the face, and that's the largest hindrance to positioning, is people's reluctance to be vertically positioned, and they're not even aware of how powerful horizontal positioning can be. As long as you can solve that main issue of finding your clients, then horizontal positioning is a great solution.
Okay. So you like both, and your default position would be, if you can identify your client base, if it's easy enough to find clients, and you would start with horizontal. If not, you would go to vertical. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so that's out of chapter 8 of the book, and it helped me clarify some of the things. I've kind of, like, when you were up on the stage at the New Business Summit talking about positioning, I would pretend to listen and go, yeah. So it was nice to finally read it in your book. Oh, that's what he meant. I should have paid more attention.
Yeah. I'm just dumbfounded, and I don't even know what to say about that, because I did listen to you, which is that's all right.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
We've got a few minutes here. I really like chapter 9, but you're going to have to explain it. So the title of chapter 9, and there's some key points here that some of them are really profound. So I want to talk about them. We don't have a lot of time. I want to talk about them fairly quickly. But explain to me the title, which is Principles for the Less Exchangeable Positioning of Expertise. What do you mean by that? And you went on to say, okay, I almost invented a new word for this title, but I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't really know. I remember typing all kinds of words into the thesaurus online, thinking of what's a better word here. And the idea is that when a prospect is thinking about hiring you, how many available substitutes are there? And so I'm redefining that notion, or not redefining so much as just recaptioning that notion of availability of substitutes that you talk about so much. And that's this idea of your positioning not as a firm, as a creative firm, not being interchangeable with others, because to whatever degree your positioning is interchangeable, then you don't have that much power in the marketplace. So in the previous chapter 8, the one we just talked about, I'm getting people to understand what the options are for positioning. And then if they buy that argument and they want to craft their own positioning, then what are those principles to make it work? Like one of them that I talk about in there is that it has to be public. You can't just have a private positioning, right? And that's the idea. These are, over the years, all the ways my clients have tried to snooker me and try to tell me that they came up with a positioning, and I'm saying, that's not a positioning, come on. And so the primary ways I caught them are what I list in that chapter 9.
I'm recalling dozens of conversations you and I have had, often like in airport lounges on trips back home, like comparing notes of like what a client tried to pull off in terms of a fake positioning.
Am I an idiot? Like, no, that's not a positioning.
Okay, so just some principles here around the articulation of your positioning. Positioning is public and it must be declared. We just joked about the fact that you have clients who say, oh, yeah, we're experts in X, we're specialists in this, we're known as specialists in this area. And you go to their website and you look at the keywords they're using, and it's advertising agency San Diego.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not declared at all. And, your SEO strategy around your website really pays off. It really states how you see your firm. So you might be saying to the consultant or to your friends, oh, we specialize in X. But if you just go look at the keywords that are being used in the meta description, then you're pretty much outed there. But another point you make is positioning is semi-permanent. What do you mean by that, semi-permanent? It's not carved in stone.
It's not carved in stone, but it's I don't know, the image I came up with in my head as I was writing that, I was just thinking about a restaurant. Like, they put a lot of money, they think carefully about the name of the restaurant, and they put it prominently out front, and maybe it's really ornate or carved, or it certainly is lighted. It's beautiful. It's not going to change every year, but the specials every night change, and they're just handwritten or they're printed out of a laser printer on paper. And that's sort of the idea, is that you want to make a positioning decision that will last years and years and years. You might, ideally, it lasts 20 or 30 years. It's hard to imagine that being the case in our world, which is changing so quickly, but at least 5 years. That's what I mean by semi-permanent.
And don't you feel like the idea of the permanence of positioning is one of the things that keeps principals from making the courageous decision around positioning? It's like, I'm going to make this decision, then I'm stuck with it forever.
Yeah, exactly. And the technology around it has changed so much as well. So, before the days of PowerPoint or color printing, it was you didn't have that luxury. You were going to spend a lot of money to get offset printing, and so you made a specific choice. Nowadays, you can change your positioning every time you go and make a pitch to somebody, and so we do that. It kills positioning.
Yeah. I worked in new business development in a small ad agency in the pre-web days. So I was doing outbound work, and I would pick up the phone, and I could make whatever claim I wanted because there was no website to which somebody could go to,
right,
to kind of validate or invalidate that claim. Listen, we're almost out of time. I do want to. There's one more really interesting point here in Chapter 9. Here's the point. The less impressive your locale, the more important positioning will be. Now, like, I'm reading this as somebody who launched a business in a village of 976 people in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
The less impressive your locale, the more important positioning will be. Why is that?
So, using you as an example, and let's say it's just a blank slate. You haven't decided what you're going to do for a living, what you're going to charge people money for. And if you're going to draw from the local audience, then you have choices, but they're limited. There's how much money do they have, and what's the size of the audience, and so on. So immediately you dismiss that and say, no, I'm going to have to draw from not just Canada and North America, but all over the world, which you do now. So then you say, why would somebody in London hire somebody who lives in a little village in BC? It's because of positioning, right? Or flip that around. Let's say I'm in a huge metropolitan area like Atlanta, where I'm sitting right now, with 5.5 million people. Well, it's hard to make a bad positioning decision if I just want to exist, because there's going to be enough work around here just falling off the trucks. But if I want to get a premium for my work, I'm going to have to be viewed as an expert that draws people in from, like, San Francisco. A company in San Francisco wants to use me in Atlanta. Why? Well, because even San Francisco doesn't have what I can provide. And so this whole notion, so you can get away with sloppy positioning easier if you're in a larger metropolitan area because the work's falling off the trucks. But if you're going to require clients to use you in a lesser locale, then you're going to have a very tight positioning.
Yeah, another way to express that would be your geographic trading area expands as your expertise deepens. The way for you to deepen your expertise is to narrow your focus. So the more narrow your focus, the broader your geographic trading area. And you're right. That's something I thought about deeply when I started this business many years ago. There isn't a client within maybe 300 miles of me.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, in fact, the first time I heard you speak, you used an illustration. I'll never forget it. And I referred to it actually in an article I wrote recently and gave you credit. But you stood up there and you said, picture this a fixed amount of water, and you're pouring this in a deep champagne glass that's narrow and deep, or take the same amount of water and pour it into a shallow cake pan. And that's the difference between deep positioning and shallow expertise. And it always stuck with me.
Yeah, it works better with beer, and then I drink the glass of beer.
Oh, up front.
Yeah. This has been great, David. The book is called The Business of Expertise by David C. Baker, How Entrepreneurial Experts Convert Insight to Impact and Wealth. And I think we're going to do one more talk on parts of this book, and I'm pretty excited about where I'm not going to give away the details, but it's going to be a little bit different, isn't it?
Apparently, yeah, I guess so. I'm a little nervous already.
I just snuck that up on you.
Yeah.
It's going to be live in London.
That will be fun.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll see you in London.
All right. Thank you, Blair.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.